art could illustrate the varied and contradictory nature of life. One of my examples for this is this impressive Diego Rivera fresco, which sits in the Detroit Institute of Arts, not far from here. Again, if you haven't seen this, I encourage you to go see it. Like any great work of art, by showing you a slide is maybe 1/100th of the experience of actually going and standing and looking at this fresco. And if you haven't seen it, you should go, and you should go now. Well, wait until the talk's over and then go. We could spend an entire hour talking about these frescoes. They're part of a room, which you see here. They're 4 walls of the room, and we're going to spend our time talking about this one. Diego Rivera was one of the great triumvirate of Mexican muralists of the early 20th century. He was a high-profile member of the Communist Party and a frequent host to Leon Trotsky when Trotsky was exiled to Mexico before Trotsky was murdered. He was given a commission to decorate the walls of what was then the Garden Court in the Detroit Institute of Arts. Like the American filmmaker Hemingway, he chose to put himself in the picture. If we focus on this area, you see the guy there in the bowler hat. That's Diego Rivera. So he put himself into the fresco looking out. And this wall is a magnificent paean to industry, to the assembly line, to the burgeoning Detroit manufacturing world that was soon to dominate, was already starting to dominate the world. But he didn't just look at the auto industry. He also looked at Detroit's other industries, particularly the pharmaceutical, the medical, and the chemical industries. I want to focus now on this part of the fresco up here in the upper right. Here you see a child being vaccinated in a medical laboratory. He's surrounded by animals whose blood is being used to make the serum. These animals are evocative of the Park Davis farms that were close by to the Detroit Institute. Park Davis was at that time the largest pharmaceutical company in the world. They had just finished a massive campaign for diphtheria antitoxin, which had saved countless hundreds of thousands of lives. But Diego Rivera is not content with simply showing us the good things that science and medicine can do. He chose to embrace the complexity of technology, to show the use of science and technology not only to help, but also to harm in the pairing of these two images. And in so doing, he contrasts the constructive and destructive results of science. If we focus back in on the vaccination panel and look below, what he's depicted here is the wonders of vaccination and a healthy human embryo. Precisely opposite in this panel, he shows the use of science for another mission, for the making of poison gas. And you see here workers making poison gas canisters, and you see here unhealthy unhealthy cells being destroyed by the poison gas. So, and although Diego Rivera could not have known what was to happen, mustard gas, which is what they might have been making, was soon to form the basis for the modern chemotherapy to treat cancers. So what Diego Rivera is doing here is embracing the contradictions that are inherent in the use of science and technology. He's saying it's not just for good, it's not just for evil. It can be life-saving and it can be profoundly toxic, as is the case with cancer chemotherapy. It can be life-saving, but it's also profoundly toxic. Now, as an aside, I'll just point out that when these murals first opened up in March 1933, there was an enormous brouhaha over this panel. People thought that it was a parody of a nativity scene. They thought the poses and draped clothing of the nurse and child, as well as the halo-like cap and the hair of the two figures, echoed traditional depictions of Mary and Jesus. The farm animals were called a manger scene, and the three scientists were interpreted as the three wise men. Members of the press, the clergy, and the Detroit City Council demanded that this mural be whitewashed off the wall. It wasn't. In so doing, by the way, Diego Rivera escaped the fate of his next major undertaking. He went from Detroit to New York City, where Rockefeller asked him to do a large painting, a large fresco for the Rockefeller Center, but Rockefeller was unhappy with the prominence that Diego Rivera chose to give to Lenin and Marx. And one day, Diego Rivera came to work, was told he wasn't working there anymore, was given a check for his troubles, and his fresco was jackhammered off the wall. I think that by looking at and thinking about this magnificent artwork, one can learn better how to appreciate complexity. Science can be used for good and evil, and sometimes both simultaneously. Examining these inherent contradictions can sometimes help us learn to be comfortable with complexity, to learn how to be off-put by conflicting data, often seen in the form of red herrings in medical diagnoses. Realizing that a work of art can have multiple contradictory meanings may also help us appreciate that families, patients, and physicians bring multiple and likewise often contradictory meanings to a specific clinical situation. Rather than seeking false simplification, the arts can help us appreciate that in medicine and in life, everything doesn't always come in one nice, neat, simple package. And what better way of looking at life than through the lens of opera, blending the visual, the dramatic, and the musical arts. This is a scene from Richard Wagner's classic work, The Ring Cycle, which encompasses well over 17 hours of music, that's not counting intermissions. I have absolutely no intention of summarizing it for you this afternoon. But I do want to talk about what's happening in this image. This is Fricka, and this is Wotan. Wotan is the king of the gods, Fricka is his wife. And what's happened in the first act is this. We've seen Sigmund and Sieglinde, two young people fall madly in love and run away together. Where they're running is to get back the gold. The gold, you see, has been stolen. And whoever has the gold rules the world. Wotan can't get the gold back himself because he's bound by the laws on his spear. But Sigmund and Sieglinde can. And if they run off and get the gold, they can save the world. Now, what's happening in Act 2 is we're having a classic ends versus means discussion that I think exemplifies the contradictions. Fricka is into morals. She points out to Wotan a number of problems. A, Sigmund and Sieglinde happen to be brother and sister. They don't realize this until they consummate their relationship at the end of the act. B, Sieglinde happens to be married to Hunding at the time. C, they've stolen material out of Hunding's house, and they run away with it. And so she says to Wotan, Wotan, you can't let this happen. You can't, Wotan wants to protect Sigmund, and she says, you can't protect Sigmund. Wotan says, Fricka, my dear, you don't seem to understand. If you don't let this go, if you don't let this happen, Valhalla is going to go up in flames. Our new house, our new home of the gods is going to burn to the ground unless you let this slide. And she says, Wotan, my dear, you don't get it. This is morally wrong. This is incest, this is adultery, this is theft, this is a moral depravity. I am tired. Oh, I think I forgot to mention, Sigmund and Sieglinde are also the illegitimate children of Wotan. So, sorry, I left out that part. So Fricka is not real happy about Sigmund and Sieglinde. Wotan says, you don't understand, Valhalla is going to go up in flames. She says, as she's saying right here, dude, you don't understand. This is wrong, and you've got to stop it. What happens eventually, just in case you're wondering, is Valhalla does go up in flames, but that's a much longer story. Well, I want to suggest that we face similar ethical issues in medicine. Maybe not exactly the same. But think about this. Let's say you're taking care of someone with cervical cancer, and it's curable at the stage that you found it in your hospital, but it won't be curable for long. And you realize that your patient is an illegal immigrant who has stolen someone else's ID and someone else's health insurance card. What do you do? I'm not going to try to answer that question here. The point is that it's a complex answer. Do you take care of her knowing that she's there illegally, knowing that she's taking resources that she's not paying for? Or do you turn her in and send her back to Mexico where she won't get treated and she'll probably die? This, by the way, is not a hypothetical situation. This actually happened. It may have happened more than once, but I know of at least one case where it happened. The point is that life is complex. I would also say that a point here is to beware of moral absolutes, beware of the notion that you can have simple rules that will apply in every situation, and also to think carefully about those with whom you disagree. Even someone with whom you profoundly disagree may and often does have a rational, reasonable basis for what they have to say. And unless you acknowledge that, as Wotan and Fricka are trying to do, you're not going to get very far. You could also say that the story about pain is part of the complexity of medicine. When do you treat pain? When do you ignore it? So here's the final thing. We've talked about pain, we've talked about complexity. I'd like to talk now about the arts and personhood. Personhood is what we all share. We all have an identity apart from cells and organs that sometimes misbehave. I'm specifically interested in personhood and the life cycle, personhood and disease, debility, and death. Charming topics, but they are what we spend a lot of our time doing in medicine, taking care of. What does it mean to be a sick person? I'm going to show you an example from a play, from one of Tom Stoppard's news plays. Tom Stoppard, you may know from Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Are Dead. I think a wonderful play. He's got a new play called Rock and Roll. And my wife and I had the opportunity to hear this play a couple of months ago. And when the character said what I'm about to show you, it struck me as being absolutely spot on. The character here is Eleanor. Eleanor is a college professor. She's dying of breast cancer. And this is what she has to say. She's weeping. And she says, "They've cut, cauterized, and zapped away my breasts, my ovaries, my womb, half my bowel, a nutmeg of my brain, and I am undiminished. I am exactly who I've always been. I am not my body. My body is nothing without me." That's the truth of it. She then turns and tears open her dress and says, "Look at it. What's left of it? It does classics, it does half-hour feminism, it does love, desire, jealousy, and fear. Christ, does it do fear? So who's the me who's still in one piece?" The emphasis is there in the original. She's making a critical point here for all of us who care for patients. I am not my body. The body may be destroyed, but not necessarily the person. And that's the critical point to keep in mind. We have actors here in the arts who can express these feelings far more forcefully and in far more arresting language than our patients usually can. Eleanor is confronting death, and she dies shortly after this scene. What does it mean to think about death? What does it mean to confront death? These are the kinds of questions that we and our patients confront daily. I'm going to turn now to some examples from the musical arts. Music is a bit different from the other arts, especially music that has no words. Music can mean different things to different people. But listening to music has certain advantages. It teaches us to focus. It teaches us to listen and not to talk. Listening to music takes time, and taking time to listen is not something that we doctors are typically very good at. Studies have shown that when patients come to see the doctor and we ask them what's wrong with them, that on average we'll let the patient talk for roughly 12 seconds before we interrupt them. Women let the patient talk a little longer than men. Music, on the other hand, defines its own pace. It has its own rhythm, which is an essential element of life. If you think about rhythm, the heartbeat, breathing. So the first example I'm going to play is from Beethoven. It's late Beethoven. Beethoven is dying. He's badly sick. He's got cirrhosis. He's got ascites. He knows he's dying. He's got all kinds of problems. He's running out of money. He's in a nasty custody fight with his nephew. And this is the last movement of his last piano sonata. It's a theme and variations. First there's a theme, then there's variations on that theme. I'm going to first play the theme for you. The theme is in C major, and those of you who are musicians will know that C major is the simplest key. There are no sharps, there are no flats. The music itself is not that hard. I think a pretty good piano student in her third year could probably play the notes. But the music is a little bit different. So let's listen to the theme from his last piano sonata. This lasts about a minute and a half.